A few years ago, I did a 1 year of ownership review on my HP Spectre X360. A lot of people seem to like that video because most tech reviewers don't do long-term reviews. They kind of play with the product for a couple weeks, make a video about it, and then put it on a shelf, which, if all you do is tech reviewing, that's about all you really can do with a new device, I suppose. But I'm not really a tech reviewer. I make YouTube videos on electronics projects and my hobbies and things of that nature. So I'm more of a guy to buy a device and just use it instead of cycling through a bunch of different things. So first off, this is kind of a mid-range spec, I guess you could say. This is sort of the full-fat M1 Pro MacBook Pro, which is confusing, but this has the 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU, 16 gigs of RAM, and 1 terabyte worth of storage. So it's kind of the step up from the default base model. Now, I will say, this is the first Apple product that I've bought. It's the only Apple product that I've ever owned. So I'm coming at this from a different perspective than most people reviewing a laptop or one of these laptops, because I think most people that have reviewed these have been Mac users. Though I think with the new Apple Silicon stuff, a lot of people have been jumping over to the Mac. So I guess my experience is kind of indicative of that, and maybe I could go over in a separate video if there's interest for it in my experience of switching from Windows to Mac OS. The main reason I wanted to switch over to Mac OS was actually because Final Cut Pro only exists on Mac OS. If you're unaware, Final Cut Pro is a piece of video editing software, and previously I was using Adobe Premiere and the Adobe Creative Cloud suite. And if you don't know, Adobe Creative Cloud costs about $50 a month. I was getting it through my university at the time, through the student tech fee, so I was still technically paying for it, but I was going to pay for it whether or not I was using it, so might as well take advantage of it type thing. Final Cut Pro with a student discount, it's about $200, and you actually get some other pieces of software with that as well. And that's a $200 one-time fee versus a monthly fee or monthly subscription for the Adobe Creative Cloud suite. So my thought was to buy the MacBook and the Mac creative apps while I was still in college and while I could still get the student discount, and kind of get that out of the way so I wouldn't have to continue paying for the Adobe suite. Granted, there are other video editing softwares that I could have tried out, but I did kind of need a new piece of hardware anyway because that HP Spectre laptop was struggling by the time I stopped using it. In terms of ownership experience on this, I don't really have that much to say. I don't really have too many complaints. Sort of an overview of the things that I noticed about it when I first got it. It's very heavy. It's very brick-like. It feels very well made. The bottom and top case line up really nicely. There's no like ledge between them like I had on my previous laptop. It's been really nice having an actual SD card slot as well. The other two things that really wowed me about this device were the display and the speakers. The display looks amazing on this, mostly because the black levels are so good with the mini LED display, and the speakers are quite good. Kind of impressive that they could fit speakers as good as they are inside of such a small laptop, or inside of any laptop really for that matter. Now I have kind of compiled a list of things that haven't gone perfectly smoothly when I got the laptop, and just things that I've noticed in general. First is when I took it out of the box, it did have a couple of like little blue marks. It almost looked like a pen had leaked and some ink had gotten like brushed on the surface or something like that. It's kind of odd, but it did just wipe off the microfiber cloth, so I'm not really sure what that was, but not a huge deal. Otherwise, the external finish of this laptop is holding up pretty well. I will say the chrome on the Apple logo in the center does get fairly scratched up if you're sliding this in and out of a backpack or anything like that. I've also noticed that there is a little scuff in this top case on the space gray exterior of this laptop, though nothing major, nothing that I could really complain about too bad. And maybe there's a couple little scratches around the USB ports where I've missed and drug a metal end of a cable around, but you really wouldn't notice that unless you were actively looking for flaws in the exterior of this device. So far for the first year, it's held up pretty well, though this hasn't been chucked around in my backpack as much as I have previous laptops, so it's not the perfect comparison. Another thing that did impress me about this laptop coming from a Windows laptop is the trackpad. Basically every MacBook review you'll ever find on the internet raves about how good the trackpads on MacBooks are compared to trackpads of Windows laptops. And they point out a lot of things like how the click feels the same across the entire surface of the trackpad, and it's big, it feels good, it tracks well, things like that. And those are all true, but there's also some other things that I didn't really expect. One of them being the fact that the touchpad is actually pressure sensitive. So if you go into like the preview of a photo and you go to mark up a photo, you can actually vary like line width of a brush. If you press harder, the line gets thicker. If you let off a little bit, it gets thinner. So it's actually like a pressure sensitive mini tablet on the trackpad, which I thought was kind of cool. Another thing I do besides video editing that's somewhat computationally heavy is CAD modeling. And I use Fusion 360 to design 3D printed parts. And one of the things that was always kind of annoying with a laptop is that if you wanted to use Fusion 360, you needed a mouse. And the experience of just using only a trackpad in Fusion 360 usually pretty bad, and that applies to any CAD modeling software, really, not just Fusion 360. But the way that the software interacts with the touchpad on this device actually makes it so that it's usable to use only the trackpad to be able to manipulate around a 3D model and move it the way that you want to. That's generally not a thing on Windows laptops, at least not ones that I've experienced. So that was a pleasant surprise. So just little convenience features like that on the touchpad make this a little bit nicer to use than my previous laptops. This is sort of a nitpicky thing, but it's different from any other laptop that I've used, and it's the fact that the rubber feet are almost more of a hard plastic than they are rubber. So if you set this down, it's actually surprisingly easy to just slide it around wherever you want to. I mean, it has enough weight to hold itself down pretty well, but it just slides around more than maybe I'd like for something that's so expensive. I don't want it to be quite so easy to knock off a table. Now, this is the first Mac that I've owned, but I have used Macs in the past. In fact, starting in kindergarten, schools that I went to used Macs. The old colorful iMacs is what we had back then. And up until high school, I used Macs for video editing and running Adobe Premiere and things like that. So I have a little bit of experience using Mac OS, but a lot of the times there's a lot of issues with those computers because they're old and slow and not really maintained very well. So I kind of had a bad opinion of Mac OS from that. But from my time in using those computers, I kind of got this motto in my head of Apple being, instead of it just works, it's more like it just works until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't work, you don't really have any idea what to do to fix it. And there's been a few things like that that I've noticed on this laptop as well. Now, this is all in relation to software, not necessarily the hardware. So really, this goes for any Mac, not necessarily just this particular model of MacBook Pro. So one of the first really annoying software problems that I had with this when I first took it out of the box was actually to do with signing into the App Store. So I had the little notification saying that I had app updates, so I clicked on that. Tried to update, I think it was like iMovie or Notes, something like that, some of the pre-installed applications from the factory. And I got to the App Store. It told me in order to update them, I needed to sign in with my Apple ID. And I thought, fair enough. I go to click sign in, type in the Apple ID, username, password, click sign in, and it gives you some kind of an error, and it tells you that you need to sign in. So click sign in again, type it again, and you get the same error over and over and over and over, and you're just stuck in this loop of sign in. It tells you that you need to sign in because there was some kind of an error, and you get stuck in this loop. So the way that you fix that, I had found this on a forum post from, I think it was like 2018. Like this has been a problem for a while apparently, and it's still not fixed. Well, at least it wasn't fixed a year ago when I got this machine. But the forum post had said you need to go sign into iTunes first, and then you can go into the App Store. And I think when you would sign into iTunes, that you just automatically got logged into the rest of the Apple services, including the App Store. But that kind of confused me because iTunes isn't a pre-installed app anymore on MacBooks or Macs in general, I guess. And instead of using iTunes, you actually needed to sign into Music, because that's kind of the thing that replaced iTunes, I guess. But once I signed into Music, it all worked. I actually could use the App Store as intended, and I haven't had any problems with that since. Another software feature that I've found to be kind of buggy and inconsistent is optimized battery charging. If you're unfamiliar, optimized battery charging is supposed to keep your battery at 80% until it thinks that you need it to be at 100%. So it waits until the last possible moment to charge from 80% to 100%, and that's supposed to be easier on the battery. The other thing this is supposed to do is if you don't use your machine on battery very often, it's supposed to never charge past 80%. So the issues that I've had with this is that it likes to just charge itself to 100% most of the time, and it's very finicky and very difficult to get it to actually not charge past 80% like it's supposed to. Because I use this machine plugged in most of the time now. I don't really have as much of a use for a mobile workstation since I'm not in college anymore. So this machine stays plugged in to a dock most of the time now. And I would really like it to not charge past 80%, but even if you do get it into a state where it's sitting at 80% and it'll tell you something like Mac rarely used on battery, charging on hold at 80% or something like that, so it just won't go all the way up to 100 when it does it properly. Problem is, if you unplug it even for a couple seconds and plug it back in, it just completely seems to wipe all of that memory of being plugged in for 2 weeks out, and it charges all the way up to 100%. And it likes to sit there for a couple weeks at 100%, and then it finally drains itself back down to 80. So that feature's just been really finicky and hasn't really worked super well for me. It's just another case of it just works until it doesn't. Because really this could be fixed just with a little check mark in the battery settings that says never charge above 80%. And then I could leave this sitting plugged in all the time at 80%, and I'd be doing less damage to my battery just having it stored there at a full charge. Though it is kind of a minor gripe because most manufacturers don't have any way of controlling the battery charge. It's just always at 100% if you're plugged in. And there is a piece of software that allows you, I think it's called Al Dente, that allows you to manually set a charge limit. And I think it still works in Apple Silicon Macs. But there is ways around this, but it'd be nice if the factory software would allow you to do what you wanted to do. One more thing I would like to mention about software is that Final Cut Pro really doesn't seem to be as snappy and as responsive as all the YouTube reviewers originally made it out to be. So I film my videos on a Panasonic Lumix G7, which produces a 4K 100 megabits per second H.264 encoded video, I believe, which really shouldn't be that much of an issue for something like this to handle. Now, when this laptop came out, I remember one of the big talking points was that it could handle so many ProRes video streams in Final Cut Pro. I think it was like 6 or 8 4K streams and like 2 or 4 8K streams even. Now, the thing is, that's kind of meaningless unless you actually shoot on a professional cinema camera with ProRes, or you encode your footage into ProRes for editing. ProRes is actually really easy to work with. It's huge file sizes, but the huge file sizes actually means that it's easier to work with in terms of the computer, because the computer has to do less math converting a smaller file into a usable video versus having that large file, which is largely uncompressed data. And I have noticed every once in a while playing the video from my camera in Final Cut Pro, it will hiccup a little bit for a few seconds. You'll hit the play button and it'll kind of play really choppily for a little bit, and then after maybe 5-10 seconds it smooths out again. So not the end of the world, but not quite as smooth of an experience as you might expect from all of the marketing and all of the other reviews that I've seen on this device. But overall, the video editing experience is quite amazing, including the export times. This is a very fast computer and very capable of video editing, though every once in a while it hiccups just a little bit. Now, I would say if I was in the market to buy a laptop again right now, I would lean towards an M2 MacBook Air, because I think an M2 MacBook Air would likely deal with most of my needs just fine. It would be a little bit less capable of doing graphics intensive things, but overall I think it would probably be powerful enough to do most of my needs. Though buying the Pro version of the same thing should last longer in theory in terms of years of surface life, because this will be faster than I need for probably quite a while, honestly. I guess another thing to touch on from coming from Windows to macOS is PC gaming. Obviously macOS is not known for its PC gaming support, but in the games that do support macOS and that you can install natively on the OS, they actually run surprisingly well on this machine, way better than I was expecting. But anyway, that's just kind of a side comment. Obviously, if you're going to do serious gaming, you're going to want a PC. But overall, my experience of owning this device has been quite positive over the past year. There's been a few little software glitches and a few little nitpicky things, but overall, I've been enjoying the device. And maybe this little mini review helps somebody. I guess let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about the device, anything that you want a long-ish term owner to answer. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, leave those down below. Consider giving the video a like. Like I said, not really a tech review channel, so maybe if this is your thing, don't subscribe, but yeah, check out the other videos if you wish. But anyway, that's it for this video, guys. Bye.